The train lurched to a grinding halt somewhere in the Nevada wilderness, and Grace Owens pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window, watching the world outside disappear into a wall of white that seemed determined to erase every trace of civilization from existence. She had been traveling from San Francisco back to her father's ranch in Carson City, a journey that should have taken less than a day on the Central Pacific Railroad. Now, in late January of 1878, Mother Nature had other plans entirely. The conductor had rushed through the car moments earlier, his face grim as he announced they would be stuck until the storm passed, and crews could clear the tracks. No one knew how long that might take. Grace pulled her burgundy traveling coat tighter around her shoulders and glanced around the dining car where she had been taking her afternoon coffee. About a dozen other passengers were scattered throughout, their faces reflecting various degrees of concern and irritation. The ornate car, with its polished wood paneling and brass fixtures, suddenly felt both too small and too large at the same time. "Miss, can I get you anything else?" She turned to find a young man standing beside her table, coffee pot in hand, his expression genuinely concerned despite the situation. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors before he had taken this position. His dark hair needed a trim, and his brown eyes held a warmth that seemed at odds with the blizzard raging outside. "I suppose another cup would be wise," Grace said, offering a small smile. "It seems we will be here for a while." The waiter poured with steady hands, not spilling a single drop despite the occasional shudder of the train. "Name is Emmett Sanders, miss. I have been working this line for about 6 months now. Never seen a storm come up this fast, though. We were in clear skies just an hour ago." "Grace Owens," she replied, watching steam curl up from her cup. "And yes, this is quite unexpected. I left San Francisco in sunshine." Emmett nodded, his gaze drifting to the window. "I grew up on a ranch outside Hangtown, so I know these Sierra storms. They can be fierce, but they pass. The problem is, we are stuck between stations with no shelter nearby. The conductor says we might be here until tomorrow morning at the earliest." Tomorrow morning. An elderly woman at the next table had been listening, her voice rising in alarm. "But I have medications I need." "They are in my trunk in the luggage car." Emmett turned to her immediately. "Madam, let me speak to the conductor. If it is urgent, we will find a way to get to the luggage. The storm is bad, but not impossible to work in for short periods." The woman clutched her reticule. "It is for my heart. I am supposed to take it with my evening meal." "I will handle it personally," Emmett assured her, already moving toward the rear of the car. Grace watched him go, impressed by how quickly he had shifted into action. She had known plenty of men who wore cowboy hats and boots, who talked big about their ranching days, but something about Emmett seemed genuinely authentic. He moved with purpose, but without hurry, confident in a way that came from real experience rather than bravado. Outside, the wind howled louder, shaking the heavy train car. Snow was accumulating on the windowsills at an alarming rate, and Grace realized that within an hour or two they might be completely buried. The thought should have frightened her, but instead she felt a strange calm. Perhaps it was the warmth of the dining car, or perhaps it was something else entirely. Emmett returned 15 minutes later, his coat covered in snow, escorting the conductor who carried several trunks. They distributed luggage to passengers who needed items, and Emmett personally helped the elderly woman locate her medicine. His hands were red from the cold, and his teeth chattered slightly, but he smiled as if it were nothing. "You should warm yourself," Grace said when he passed her table again. "Soon as everyone is settled," he replied. "The kitchen crew is preparing an early supper. Looks like we will all be spending the night together, so we might as well be comfortable." The next hour passed in a flurry of activity, as the dining car transformed from a simple eating establishment into a makeshift shelter. The kitchen staff, under Emmett's direction, began preparing a substantial meal. Blankets were retrieved from storage compartments. The conductor explained that the sleeping cars were too cold to occupy safely, their small stoves insufficient against the brutal temperatures, but the dining car's larger kitchen would keep this space warm enough. Grace found herself watching Emmett more than she should. He moved through the car with easy grace, helping an older gentleman settle into a more comfortable seat, entertaining a frightened child with stories about his horse back home, checking that everyone had enough coffee or tea. He was a waiter, yes, but he carried himself like someone who was simply between chapters of a bigger story. When he finally paused near her table again, Grace spoke before thinking. "You said you grew up on a ranch. What brought you to the railroad?" Emmett glanced around, ensuring no one needed immediate attention, then gestured to the empty seat across from her. "May I, please?" He sat with a grateful sigh, rolling his shoulders to ease obvious tension. Up close, Grace could see the lines around his eyes that came from squinting into sun and wind, the calluses on his hands that no amount of coffee pot carrying could create. This was a man who knew hard work. "My father died 2 years ago," Emmett began, his voice low. "Left the ranch to me and my 2 brothers. We tried to make a go of it, but between drought and cattle prices dropping, we could not keep it going. My brothers found work in the mines up near Virginia City. I took this job because it let me stay in the area and the pay is steady." "I am sorry about your father," Grace said softly. "Thank you. He was a good man, taught us everything about ranching, about the land. Losing the place felt like losing him all over again." Emmett looked out the window at the swirling white. "But life goes on. You learn to adapt." Grace understood adaptation better than he knew. "My mother died when I was 12. My father has been raising me and my 3 sisters alone ever since. I just finished at a finishing school in San Francisco." "Finished at a finishing school," Emmett repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Sounds like something from a dime novel." She laughed despite herself. "It does, doesn't it? The truth is less glamorous. My father wanted us to have opportunities he never had. He started as a ranch hand and worked his way to owning his own spread. He thinks education will open doors. Will it?" The question was genuine, not challenging. Grace considered it as she sipped her coffee. "I suppose that depends on which doors I want opened. The school taught me French and piano and proper etiquette, but I am not certain any of that will help me much back home. Can you still ride?" Emmett asked. "Better than I can play piano," Grace admitted, and they both smiled. The conversation might have continued, but the head cook called for Emmett from the kitchen. He excused himself with obvious reluctance, and Grace found herself disappointed to see him go. She had been dreading the long evening trapped on the train, but suddenly it seemed far more interesting than she had anticipated. Supper was served as the storm raged harder. The kitchen staff had prepared beef stew, fresh bread, and dried apple pie with remarkable efficiency given the circumstances. Emmett and the other waiters moved through the car, serving everyone with care. Grace noticed how Emmett made sure the elderly woman got extra portions, how he cut up the meat for a passenger whose hands shook with palsy, how he kept the frightened child's water glass full. After the meal, as dishes were cleared and people settled in for the long night ahead, the conductor stood to address the passengers. "Folks, I know this isn't what anyone expected when they boarded this morning. The crew and I will do everything we can to keep you safe and comfortable. The storm should blow itself out by morning, and we have sent word via telegraph before we lost the lines. Help will come as soon as the weather allows. Are we in danger? Someone asked. No more than being snowed in anywhere else, the conductor replied honestly. We have food, water, and heat. The car is sound. We just need to wait it out together. After he finished, an uncomfortable silence fell over the car. People shifted in their seats, clearly anxious about sleeping in such cramped quarters with strangers. Then Grace heard someone tuning a guitar, and she turned to see Emmett settling onto a stool near the kitchen, the instrument looking well worn in his hands. If folks don't mind, he said. I thought some music might help pass the time. No one objected. In fact, several people moved closer. Emmett began to play, his fingers finding chords with practiced ease. He started with a slow, sweet melody that Grace didn't recognize, but it filled the car with something warmer than the heat from the kitchen. Then he shifted into a livelier tune, and someone began to clap along. Grace found herself captivated. This was yet another layer to Emmett Sanders, another piece of the puzzle. Ranch hand-turned railroad waiter who played guitar and seemed to genuinely care about strangers. She wondered what other surprises he might hold. When Emmett paused between songs, the elderly woman called out, "Do you know Lorna?" "I do, madam," Emmett replied and began the haunting melody. As he sang, his voice clear and true, Grace felt something shift inside her. The song was about lost love and longing, about paths not taken and chances missed. Emmett sang it with real feeling, and Grace wondered who had broken his heart, or perhaps who he had left behind when the ranch failed. The music continued for over an hour. Some passengers dozed off in their seats, lulled by the melodies. Others sat listening with eyes closed, lost in their own memories. Grace stayed awake, unable to look away from Emmett, unable to stop the strange flutter in her chest that seemed to intensify each time his eyes met hers across the car. Finally, he set the guitar aside and began helping the other crew members arrange blankets for those who wanted to sleep. The car grew quieter as lamps were dimmed. Grace accepted a blanket but knew she was too restless for sleep. She moved to a window seat near the rear of the car, watching the snow continue to fall in thick, relentless sheets. She didn't hear Emmett approach until he spoke. "Mind some company." Grace gestured to the seat beside her. "Please, I cannot seem to settle." He sat, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a moment they simply watched the storm together. Then Emmett said, "Storms like this, they make you think about things, about where you are and where you want to be." "And where do you want to be?" Grace asked. Emmett was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I want my own place again. Maybe not as big as my father's ranch, but something. Land of my own, a few horses, cattle if I can manage it. I want to build something that lasts." "That is a good dream," Grace said. "What about you? What do you want?" No one had asked Grace that question before. Her father asked about her studies, her sisters asked about San Francisco fashions, her teachers asked about her accomplishments. But no one had simply asked what she wanted. "I want to matter," she said finally. "I want to do something real, something that makes a difference. I spent 6 months learning which fork to use and how to paint watercolors, but I keep thinking about my mother. She could deliver a calf, mend a fence, shoot a rattlesnake from 30 paces. She was strong and capable, and people respected her for it. I want that kind of respect." Emmett turned to look at her fully, and in the dim light his expression was intense. "You will have it, I can tell. How can you possibly know that?" "Because you are here having this conversation instead of complaining about the accommodations like some of the others. Because you ask real questions and give real answers. Because you see people, not just their positions." He paused. "And because when you talk about your mother, you light up. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are inside." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature in the car. You discern all that from a few hours of conversation. I have always been good at reading people, Emmett said. Comes from working with cattle and horses. You learn to notice the small things, the signs that tell you what is really going on underneath the surface. And what do you see when you look at me? Grace asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Emmett held her gaze. I see someone who is between two worlds right now. The one you came from and the one you have been trained for. I see someone trying to figure out which one really fits. He smiled slightly. I also see someone who is beautiful and doesn't quite realize it, which makes her even more appealing. Grace's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her so directly, with such unguarded honesty. The young men she had met in San Francisco had been full of flowery compliments and empty flattery. Emmett's words felt different, true. That is quite an assessment from a cowboy turned waiter, she said, trying to keep her voice light even as her heart raced. I am observant, he replied, and I know an exceptional person when I meet one. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the snow, each lost in their own thoughts, but somehow connected in the quiet. Grace felt something she had never experienced before, a pull toward another person that went beyond simple attraction. She wanted to know everything about Emmett Sanders, wanted to understand how he had become the man sitting beside her. Eventually, exhaustion began to win. Grace's eyes grew heavy, and she found herself leaning slightly toward Emmett without meaning to. He noticed and gently adjusted their position so she could rest her head against his shoulder, the gesture both protective and tender. Sleep, he said softly. I will keep watch. You need rest too, Grace murmured. I will get some. But right now, this is exactly where I want to be. Grace drifted off with those words warming her from the inside out, more effective than any fire could ever be. She woke hours later to find pale dawn light filtering through the snow-covered windows. The storm had diminished to light flurries, and the wind had died down significantly. She was still tucked against Emmett's side, his arm around her shoulders, and she could tell from his breathing that he was awake. Good morning, he said quietly. Grace sat up, immediately missing his warmth. Did you sleep at all? A bit. Enough. He gestured toward the windows. Storm broke about an hour ago. The conductor already sent men out to assess the situation. Other passengers were beginning to stir, and the kitchen crew was starting preparations for breakfast. The car came to life gradually, people stretching and talking in low voices about the night's adventure. Emmett stood and offered Grace his hand. Come on, I want to show you something. She took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. He led her to the forward door of the dining car, which opened onto the small platform between cars. The cold hit her immediately, but it was nothing compared to the view. Snow covered everything in deep, pristine drifts. The train was buried to its windows in places, creating a landscape of white curves and smooth surfaces broken only by the dark skeleton of trees in the distance. The rising sun painted everything in shades of pink and gold, and the world looked newly made, untouched and perfect. It is beautiful, Grace breathed, her words creating small clouds in the frigid air. I thought you might appreciate it, Emmett said. He stood close behind her, blocking some of the wind. Before everyone gets up and it becomes about digging out and getting moving again, I wanted you to see it like this. Peaceful. Grace turned to face him, and suddenly the cold didn't matter at all. They were inches apart, alone in this frozen moment, and she could see in his eyes that he felt the same pull she did. Emmett, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his cold fingers brushing her cheek. I know we just met. I know this is probably crazy, but I need to say it anyway. Something happened last night, Grace. Something I did not expect and cannot ignore. I feel it too, she whispered. I don't have much to offer. I am a waiter on a train, saving every penny to buy a small piece of land somewhere. I cannot promise you fancy things or an easy life, but I can promise you honesty and hard work and everything I have in me to make you happy." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't want fancy things. I want exactly what you just described. I want real." "Then maybe we should see where this goes," Emmett said. "When we get to Carson City, let me call on you properly. Let me meet your father and show him I am serious." "He will interrogate you," Grace warned. "He is very protective. I would expect nothing less." Emmett smiled. "I will answer every question honestly." Grace wanted to kiss him. Every part of her screamed to close the distance and press her lips to his, but even in her boldness she held back. They had just met, were just beginning whatever this was between them. There would be time for kisses and more, but right now, this moment of possibility was its own kind of perfect. They went back inside as other passengers began to wake and breakfast preparations filled the car with warm, inviting smells. Emmett returned to his duties, but every time he passed Grace's table, their eyes met, and small smiles were exchanged. The crew from the dining car joined passengers from other cars in digging out the train. It took most of the morning, with men working in shifts to clear the tracks ahead and behind. Emmett worked alongside them, his waiter's uniform exchanged for the rough work clothes of his cowboy past. Grace watched through the window, admiring the strength in his shoulders as he wielded a shovel, the easy way he worked with the other men. By noon, a relief train arrived from the nearest station, bringing fresh crews and equipment. The stranded passengers cheered, and within another hour, they were moving again, slowly but steadily, through the white landscape. Grace remained in the dining car, savoring her last hours in this space that had brought Emmett into her life. He served her lunch with the same attentiveness he had shown everyone, but when he poured her coffee, his hand brushed hers, and the contact sent electricity through her. "We should arrive in Carson City by early evening," he said. "I finish my shift at the station there." "My father will likely meet me at the platform," Grace replied. "Should I introduce you then, or would you prefer to call at the house?" Emmett considered this. "Let me meet him briefly at the station, then call on you properly tomorrow. That way, he has time to think about it without feeling ambushed." "Wise," Grace agreed, though the thought of waiting even one day to see him again felt unbearable. The afternoon passed too quickly. They talked whenever Emmett could spare a moment, learning more about each other in fragments and stolen minutes. Grace discovered that Emmett loved to read, that his mother had taught him guitar before she died when he was 14, that he had a scar on his left hand from a bull that had gotten ornery during branding season. Emmett learned that Grace could speak passable French but preferred Spanish, that she missed her sisters terribly, that she had once broken her arm falling from a wild Mustang she was attempting to gentle. As the train approached Carson City, Grace felt her heart begin to race for entirely different reasons. She was bringing home more than new accomplishments from finishing school. She was bringing home the possibility of a future she had not even known she wanted until yesterday. The platform came into view, crowded with people meeting the delayed train. Grace spotted her father immediately, his tall frame and weathered face anxious as he scanned the arriving passengers. Beside him stood her eldest sister, Catherine, and Grace felt a rush of love for them both. Emmett appeared at her side as the train came to a complete stop. "That him?" "Yes, the tall one with the gray beard." "He looks like he could break me in half," Emmett observed. "Probably," Grace agreed, "but he is fair, he will give you a chance." They disembarked together, and Grace's father spotted her immediately. His face transformed with relief, and he crossed the platform in long strides, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Grace," Thank God. When we heard about the train being stranded, we have been beside ourselves with worry. I am fine, Father. We were well cared for. She pulled back and gestured to Emmett. This is Emmett Sanders. He is one of the waiters in the dining car, and he made sure everyone was safe and comfortable during the storm. Her father extended his hand, his expression assessing. George Owens. I appreciate you looking after my daughter. Emmett shook his hand firmly. It was my privilege, sir. Actually, I was hoping I might call on Miss Owens tomorrow with your permission to continue our acquaintance. George's eyebrows rose, and Grace could see him taking Emmett's measure. The worn but clean uniform, the honest eyes, the respectful demeanor. I see. And what are your intentions regarding my daughter, Mr. Sanders? To get to know her better, sir. To see if what we both felt during the storm is something real and lasting. Emmett did not flinch under George's scrutiny. I cannot offer much right now. I am working to save for my own land, but I am honest and hardworking, and I care about her. That is the truth. George looked at Grace, who met his eyes steadily, silently pleading. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he nodded. Come to the ranch tomorrow afternoon. We will talk properly then. Thank you, sir. Emmett turned to Grace. Until tomorrow, then. Until tomorrow, she echoed, and it took all her willpower not to reach for his hand. As Emmett tipped his hat and returned to the train, Catherine linked her arm through Grace's. Well, that was interesting. Who exactly is he? Someone special, Grace replied, watching Emmett disappear into the crowd. Someone very special. The ride to the ranch was filled with Catherine's excited questions and their father's more measured inquiries. Grace answered them all, describing the storm, the night in the dining car, and Emmett's kindness. She carefully avoided mentioning just how deeply she had fallen in so short a time, knowing it would sound insane even to her own ears. That night, lying in her own bed after months away, Grace could not sleep. She kept replaying every conversation, every look, every moment she had shared with Emmett. Part of her worried that in the light of day, away from the unusual circumstances of the storm, the connection would fade. But a deeper part of her knew better. What she felt was real, and it was not going away. The next day crawled by. Grace helped her younger sisters with their lessons, caught up on ranch business with her father, tried and failed to focus on anything other than the coming afternoon. Catherine watched her with knowing amusement, having clearly guessed that her sister's feelings ran far deeper than simple interest. When a knock finally came at the front door, Grace had to force herself not to run. She waited in the parlor while her father answered, listening to the low rumble of male voices in the entrance hall. Emmett appeared in the doorway looking nervous but determined. He wore clean clothes that showed care but were clearly his best, rather than anything fancy. In his hands he held a small bouquet of winter flowers, probably expensive given the season. Miss Owens, he said formally, these are for you. Thank you, Grace replied, taking the flowers and gesturing to a chair. Please sit. Her father joined them, taking a position by the fireplace that allowed him to observe everything. So, Mr. Sanders, tell me about yourself. Grace mentioned you grew up on a ranch near Hangtown. What followed was an extensive conversation during which her father asked every conceivable question about Emmett's background, his finances, his plans for the future, his character references. Emmett answered everything with patient honesty, never trying to embellish or hide his circumstances. I lost my family's ranch, Mr. Owens, and that is something I will always regret, but I learned from it. I understand now what it takes to survive in this country, what mistakes to avoid. When I have my own place again, I will do it right. And you think you can provide for a wife on a waiter's salary while saving for land? George pressed. Not comfortably, Emmett admitted. Which is why I am not asking to marry your daughter today, sir. I am asking for the chance to court her, to prove myself worthy over time. I know I need to establish myself first. George studied him for a long moment. Grace, would you excuse us? I would like to speak with Mr. Sanders alone. Grace wanted to protest but knew better. She left the room, joining Catherine and her younger sisters in the kitchen where they were pretending not to eavesdrop. He seems nice, Catherine offered. He is more than nice, Grace said. He is everything. In the parlor, George waited until Grace's footsteps faded before speaking again. Let me be direct, Mr. Sanders. My daughter has been raised with certain expectations and opportunities. She just completed an expensive education. She could have her pick of young men from wealthy families in San Francisco or elsewhere. Why should I let her throw that away for a waiter who might never own more than a few acres? Emmett met his eyes steadily. You should not, sir. If I were you, I would want better for my daughter too. But I cannot control what Grace wants, and I think you will find she has her own mind about such things. He leaned forward, his intensity unmistakable. I love her, Mr. Owens. I know it has only been 2 days, and that sounds impossible, but it is true. I fell in love with her intelligence, her kindness, her strength. And I promise you this, if you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving I was worthy of it. I will build something she can be proud of. I will give her a good life. Love is not enough to sustain a marriage, George said quietly. I loved my wife more than life itself, but we also had a working ranch and stability. Without that foundation, love can wither. You are right, sir, but I am not asking to marry her tomorrow. I am asking for time to build that foundation while proving my feelings are genuine. I will work double shifts if I have to. I will save every penny. I will do whatever it takes. George was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, my wife, Grace's mother, was a ranch owner's daughter. I was a hand on her father's spread. Everyone said we were mismatched, that it would never work. But we loved each other and we built something good together before she was taken from us. He paused. I see that same fire in Grace when she talks about you. I saw it in you just now. So I will give you 6 months. 6 months, Emmett repeated. 6 months to prove yourself. You may court Grace during that time, but there will be no engagement, no promises made until the end of that period. You show me you can save money, hold steady employment, and treat my daughter with respect, and we will talk about the future. But if I see you are wasting her time or leading her on, this ends immediately. Understood? Understood, sir. Thank you. Emmett stood and offered his hand. I will not disappoint you. See that you don't, George replied, shaking his hand. Because if you break her heart, there isn't a place in Nevada you could hide from me. When Grace was allowed back into the room, she could see immediately that something had been decided. Her father looked resigned but not unhappy, and Emmett looked determined and hopeful. You may court my daughter, George announced, under appropriate supervision and with the understanding that we will reassess in 6 months. Grace could not contain her smile. Thank you, Father. Do not thank me yet, he said gruffly, and do not make me regret this. George left them alone, though the door remained open and Catherine appeared in the hallway, clearly playing chaperone. Emmett and Grace sat together on the settee, close but not touching, both grinning like fools. 6 months, Emmett said. I can do a lot in 6 months. You do not have to prove anything to me, Grace said softly. I already know how I feel. But I have to prove it to your father and to myself. I want to be able to offer you something real, Grace. You deserve that. They talked until early evening, making plans for how they would see each other given Emmett's work schedule. He had 2 days off each week, and he promised to spend them at the ranch, helping with work if George would allow it, courting Grace properly. On other days, Grace could sometimes meet him in town when he finished his shifts. As the sun began to set, Emmett prepared to leave. Grace walked him to the door, her heart full. "This is really happening," she said wonderingly. "It really is." Emmett glanced around to make sure they had a moment of relative privacy, then gently took her hand. "I meant what I told your father. I love you, Grace. I know it is fast and probably foolish, but it is true." "It is not foolish," Grace replied. "I love you too. I think I knew it when you were playing guitar in the storm, or maybe when you brought that woman her medicine, or maybe the moment you first smiled at me. Whenever it happened, it is real." Emmett lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles gently. "6 months will fly by. I know they will." He left then, riding away on a borrowed horse that would take him back to town and his small room near the railroad depot. Grace watched until he disappeared from view, already counting the hours until she would see him again. The next months proved both challenging and wonderful. Emmett kept his promise, spending every free moment at the ranch. George put him to work immediately, testing his skills and his commitment. Emmett mended fences, helped with the horses, assisted in moving cattle to spring pastures. He worked without complaint, proving he remembered everything from his ranching days. Grace's younger sisters, Mary and Alice, adored him. He taught them to play guitar, told them stories about the train and the interesting passengers he served, and treated them with genuine affection. Even Catherine, who had been skeptical at first, admitted that Emmett was special. In town, Grace sometimes met Emmett after his shifts, and they would walk together through the streets of Carson City, talking about everything and nothing. They discussed books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams for the future. Emmett told her about the piece of land he had his eye on, a small valley property with good water and grazing. The owner was willing to sell cheap because it needed work, but Emmett saw potential. Grace talked about wanting to be involved in the ranch operations more seriously, about using her education to help expand her father's business. She had ideas about breeding better stock, about diversifying into sheep or crops. Emmett listened and offered suggestions, treating her thoughts as valuable rather than dismissing them as women's fancies. As winter melted into spring, their relationship deepened. George watched carefully but seemed satisfied with what he saw. Emmett's bank account grew steadily, proof of his dedication to saving. He picked up extra shifts, sometimes working 16-hour days, but he never complained and never missed a promised visit to the ranch. One Sunday in April, Emmett asked Grace to ride out with him to see the property he wanted to buy. Catherine accompanied them as chaperone, but she stayed tactfully behind as they explored the land. The valley was beautiful despite its overgrown state. A creek ran through it, and the grass was coming in green and lush. The cabin that stood on the property was rough but sound, and Grace could immediately see how it could be improved. "It needs a lot of work," Emmett said, watching her face carefully, "but the bones are good. The water rights are solid. I could run maybe 50 head of cattle to start, build up from there." "It is perfect," Grace said honestly. "I can see it, Emmett. I can see what it could become." "Can you see yourself here?" he asked quietly. "Because I cannot imagine this place or any place without you in it." Grace turned to him, her heart swelling. "I can see it clearly. You and me building something together, making this into a real home." Emmett pulled her close, and for the first time he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and restrained passion. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I am going to make an offer on this place," Emmett said. "Even if your father says no at the end of 6 months, I need to move forward with my life. But I am praying he says yes, Grace. I am praying we can build this dream together." "He will say yes," Grace said with more confidence than she felt. He sees how hard you work, how much you care. He has to say yes. But as the 6-month deadline approached, Grace grew nervous. Her father had warmed to Emmett, but remained non-committal about the future. He watched and evaluated, but gave no indication of his final decision. 2 weeks before the deadline, Emmett received word that his offer on the Valley property had been accepted. He would take possession at the end of June, just after the 6 months were up. He told Grace the news with mixed emotions. "It is good news," he said, "but it also means if your father says no, I will be moving out there alone, trying to build something while my heart is here with you." "Let's not think about that," Grace said. "Let's have faith that it will work out." The final Sunday of the 6-month period arrived with brilliant sunshine and warm temperatures. The whole Owens family gathered for a large dinner, and Emmett was invited to join them. The atmosphere was celebratory but tense, everyone knowing that George would announce his decision. After the meal, George asked Emmett and Grace to join him in his study. Catherine threw Grace an encouraging look as they left the room. George sat behind his desk, his expression serious. "Emmett, 6 months ago I gave you a trial period. I have watched you carefully during that time. I have asked around about you, checked your references, observed how you treat my daughter and my family." "Yes, sir," Emmett said, his voice steady despite his obvious nerves. "I have seen you work harder than most men half your age. I have seen you save money when you could have spent it on yourself. I have seen you treat Grace with respect and genuine affection." George paused. "I have also seen my daughter happier than she has been since her mother died. That matters more to me than anything else." Grace held her breath. "So if you are still interested in marrying my daughter, you have my blessing," George finished, "with a few conditions." Emmett's face lit up. "Anything, sir." "First, I want you to keep working the railroad until your ranch is properly established. You will need that steady income. Second, I am going to help you with the down payment on that Valley property as a wedding gift. Third, Grace will have a share in the ranch equal to yours. This will be a partnership, not her becoming just a ranch wife with no say." "I would not want it any other way," Emmett said immediately. George stood and came around the desk, offering his hand. "Then welcome to the family, son. Take care of her." "I promise I will, sir, for the rest of my life." Grace threw her arms around her father, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Father. Thank you so much." "Your mother would have liked him," George said gruffly, hugging her back. "She always did have a soft spot for stubborn cowboys with more heart than sense." That evening, Emmett officially proposed, kneeling in the Owens family parlor with all the sisters watching and crying happily. He presented Grace with a simple gold ring he had saved for months to buy. "Grace Owens, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my partner, and my love for all the days we have left on this earth?" "Yes," Grace said through happy tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They married in late July of 1878, in a small church in Carson City, with family and friends filling the pews. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved, and Emmett wore a new suit purchased especially for the occasion. As they spoke their vows, both felt the rightness of it, the sense that they had found exactly what they were meant to find in each other. The reception was held at the Owens Ranch, with music and dancing and food in abundance. Emmett played guitar, and Grace sang alongside him, their voices blending perfectly. As the sun set and guests began to depart, George pulled Emmett aside. "I never got to tell my wife's father thank you for giving me a chance," he said. "He died before I could prove myself worthy. So I am telling you now, take care of her, love her, build something good together." "I will, sir. I promise." Emmett and Grace spent their wedding night in the Valley cabin, which had been cleaned and prepared with help from Grace's sisters. It was simple but cozy, and as they lay together in the darkness, listening to the creek gurgle outside, both felt overwhelmed with happiness. "I keep thinking about the storm," Grace said, nestled against Emmett's chest. "If it had not happened, if we had not been stranded, we might never have met." "I think we would have found each other somehow," Emmett replied. "Some things are just meant to be." The first years of their marriage were marked by hard work and steady progress. Emmett continued working for the railroad while spending every spare moment developing the ranch. Grace proved herself invaluable, using her education to keep detailed records, her ranching knowledge to make smart decisions about livestock, and her determination to turn the rough cabin into a real home. They expanded the cabin room by room, doing much of the work themselves with help from Grace's family. They built corrals and fences, brought in cattle, and established relationships with buyers. It was exhausting and sometimes discouraging work, but they did it together, and that made all the difference. 2 years into their marriage, Grace discovered she was expecting their first child. Emmett was overjoyed but also terrified, remembering how his own mother had died in childbirth. Grace remained calm and practical, working with the local midwife to prepare. Their son was born in March of 1880, a healthy, loud baby they named Henry after Emmett's father. Emmett held his son with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny life they had created. "He is perfect," he kept saying. "Absolutely perfect." Grace, exhausted but happy, smiled at the sight of her husband cradling their baby. "He is ours. That makes him perfect automatically." Motherhood suited Grace, but she refused to let it consume her entirely. With the help of her sisters, who loved to babysit, she continued working on the ranch. She rode out to check cattle with Henry strapped to her back, kept the books while he napped nearby, planned expansion while nursing him. Emmett finally left the railroad when Henry was 6 months old. The ranch was producing enough income, and he wanted to be home with his family. His last day on the train was bittersweet. The job had served its purpose, had brought him to Grace, but he was ready to leave it behind. Over the next several years, their ranch grew steadily. They added more land, improved their herd, and built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Grace's business acumen combined with Emmett's ranching knowledge made them a formidable team. People in the area stopped seeing Grace as just a ranch wife and began seeking her opinion on livestock and land management. Their family grew as well. A daughter, Clara, arrived in 1882, followed by another son, Thomas, in 1884. Each birth brought new joy and new challenges, but Emmett and Grace navigated it all with the same partnership that had defined their relationship from the beginning. Grace's father became a regular visitor, delighting in his grandchildren and offering advice on the ranch. On his deathbed in 1885, he pulled Emmett close. "You proved me right," George whispered. "I gave you a chance and you made the most of it. Take care of our Grace." "Always," Emmett promised, "until my last breath." After George's death, Grace inherited a share of her family's ranch along with her sisters. Rather than divide the property, they agreed to keep it whole with Grace managing the business side while her sisters ran the day-to-day operations. This arrangement worked well, combining the two properties into a more substantial operation. As their children grew, Emmett and Grace made sure to teach them the values that had built their success: hard work, honesty, partnership, and the importance of seizing opportunities when they appeared. They told the story of the blizzard often, how a storm had stranded them together and changed the course of both their lives. "I was serving coffee," Emmett would say, "and your mother was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I knew right then that my life had just changed." He was patient and kind, Grace would add, And when he played guitar in the storm, I knew I was going to love him forever. The children loved the story, never tiring of hearing about their parents' romantic beginning. As they grew older, they came to appreciate the deeper truth in it, that their parents had built something lasting from that initial connection, had turned a chance meeting into a lifetime of love and partnership. By 1895, the ranch had expanded to over 2,000 acres. Their children were growing into capable young people. Henry, now 15, showed his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for numbers. Clara, 13, had her mother's determination and her father's musical talent. Thomas, 11, was still finding his way but showed promise in everything he attempted. Emmett and Grace sat on the porch of their house one evening, watching the sun set over their valley. The house had grown over the years, expanded from that rough cabin into a proper home with multiple bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a parlor filled with comfortable furniture. But the heart of it remained the same, built on love and partnership. "You ever think about that blizzard?" Grace asked, leaning against her husband. "All the time," Emmett replied, putting his arm around her. "Best storm that ever happened to me. I was so scared that night, not of the storm, but of the feeling you stirred in me. I thought I was going mad, falling in love with someone I had just met. And now I know it was not madness, it was recognition. My soul recognized yours, and that is why it happened so fast." Emmett kissed the top of her head. "I served you coffee and ended up serving you my heart. Best trade I ever made," Grace laughed. "Such a romantic, even after all these years." "Only for you," he said. "Only ever for you." They sat together as the stars came out, comfortable in the silence, secure in their love. The valley around them hummed with the sounds of evening, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corrals, the creek providing its constant gentle music. Inside the house, their children laughed about something, the sound carrying through the open windows. Everything they had built, everything they had become, had started with a chance encounter during a blizzard. A stranded train, a dining car, a cowboy waiter, and a young woman returning from finishing school. The odds of it all working out had been slim, but they had beaten those odds through love and commitment and the willingness to fight for what they had found. As the years continued to pass, their love deepened rather than fading. They weathered droughts and economic downturns, celebrated successes and mourned losses, but always together. Grace became known throughout Nevada as a savvy businesswoman and rancher, her opinion sought by men who would have dismissed her decades earlier. Emmett remained her partner in all things, proud of her accomplishments and supportive of her ambitions. Their children grew and made their own ways in the world. Henry took over much of the ranch operations as Emmett's joints began to ache with age. Clara married a doctor in Carson City and divided her time between her husband's practice and helping with ranch business. Thomas surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, dedicating himself to educating children in rural Nevada. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Emmett and Grace celebrated their 22nd anniversary. They hosted a party at the ranch, inviting friends and family from across the state. During the celebration, someone asked Emmett to play guitar, and he obliged, choosing the same songs he had played during the blizzard all those years ago. As he sang Lorna, Grace was transported back to that dining car, to the young waiter who had captured her heart so completely. She caught his eye, and he smiled at her, that same warm smile that had started everything. After the party, their grandchildren tucked into bed in various rooms throughout the house. Emmett and Grace walked out to the creek. The property had changed so much since that first day they had explored it together, but the essence remained the same. This was their land, built by their hands, sustained by their love. 22 years, Grace mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. Forever sounds about right, Emmett said. I cannot remember what life was like before you, and I don't want to. Do you have any regrets? Grace asked. About giving up working the railroad, about the hard years when we were building this place. Emmett thought about it seriously before answering. Not a single one. Every hard day, every setback, every challenge was worth it because I faced it with you. I would not change a thing. Not even the blizzard, Grace teased. Especially not the blizzard, Emmett replied. That blizzard was the best thing that ever happened to me. They stood by the creek until the moon rose high, silver light painting everything in shades of gray and white, reminiscent of that long-ago storm. Then they walked back to the house hand in hand, the same way they had walked through life together. The final years of their lives were peaceful. They watched their grandchildren grow, secure in the knowledge that the legacy they were leaving was about more than land or cattle. They were leaving a legacy of partnership, of love that endured, of building something meaningful together. Emmett passed away in his sleep in the spring of 1912, at the age of 59. Grace held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering the words she had told him thousands of times over their 34 years of marriage. I love you. Forever and always, I love you. Grace lived another 8 years, continuing to be involved in the ranch until her own health began to fail. She spent her final years surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, all of them beneficiaries of the love story that had started in a blizzard. On quiet evenings, she would tell them about the storm, about the handsome waiter who had brought her coffee and somehow, impossibly, had ended up bringing her everything she had ever wanted. She spoke of him with such love, such vivid memory, that the children felt as if they knew him in his youth as well as they had known him as a grandfather. Grace died peacefully in her sleep in January of 1920, during another winter storm. Her children gathered around her bed, and Clara held her mother's hand, feeling it grow cold as her spirit departed. She is with Father now, Henry said, tears streaming down his weathered face. Back in that dining car where it all started. They buried Grace next to Emmett on a hill overlooking the valley they had built together. The headstones were simple but beautiful, marked with their names, dates, and a single inscription that Grace had requested. Together through the storm, forever beyond it. The ranch continued under Henry's management, then passed to his children, and eventually to their children. Through all the generations, the story of Emmett and Grace remained central to the family's identity. The tale of how a blizzard had brought them together, how a cowboy waiter had served coffee and love in equal measure, how two people from different paths had found each other and built something lasting. The valley still stands, a testament to their love and hard work. The creek still runs clear and cold, and on winter nights when the wind howls and snow falls thick, some say you can still hear guitar music floating through the valley, and the sound of two people laughing together, young and in love, sheltered from the storm in each other's arms. Their story became legend in that part of Nevada, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from embellishment. But the core truth remained unchanged through all the retellings. Two people had met by chance, had recognized something essential in each other, and had devoted their lives to honoring that connection. In an era of hardship and uncertainty, they had created certainty through their commitment. In a wild land, they had carved out a place of love and safety. The blizzard that had stranded them in that dining car had lasted only hours, but its impact had echoed through generations. It had brought together a woman seeking purpose, and a man seeking a future, and together they had found both. Emmett had served Grace coffee, conversation, and eventually his whole heart. She had accepted all three and had given him everything in return. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It was a story of steady devotion, of choosing each other every day, of building a life one decision, one moment, one act of love at a time. It was a story of partnership in its truest form, where two people worked together to create something neither could have achieved alone. And it all started with a blizzard, a train, and a cowboy waiter who saw past the surface to recognize the woman he would love for the rest of his life. That chance meeting, that brief stranding, had set in motion a love that would outlast them both, living on in the land they had nurtured, the children they had raised, and the example they had set for everyone fortunate enough to witness their devotion. In the end, that is what made their story worth telling and retelling. Not the romance of their first meeting, though that was compelling enough, but the way they had turned that initial spark into a fire that warmed everyone around them. They had shown that love, real love, was not about perfect circumstances or easy choices. It was about commitment and partnership, and the willingness to work through storms, both literal and metaphorical. Emmett and Grace had weathered many storms after that first one, but they had weathered them together, and that had made all the difference. Their legacy lived on not just in the prosperous ranch or the children who carried their names, but in the example they had set of what love could be when two people truly committed to building it together. And so the story endured, passed from generation to generation, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected circumstances, and that love, when properly nurtured and honored, can indeed last forever. The blizzard had stranded them together for one night, but they had chosen to stay together for a lifetime, and that choice, renewed every day, had made all the difference in the world.